Welcome to the Nate and Kamara Watch Movies and Probably Talk About Other Stuff podcast. My name's Kamara.
Hold on. It's Nate and Kamara talk about movies.
And probably other stuff?
We're off to a wonderful start.
Okay, but my name, introduce yourself.
Okay. Well, hopefully you listen to the intro so you know who I am.
And you know the real name.
Yeah. Yes, you know the real name. My name is Nate. I'm a high school senior. I love movies. I'd like to make movies. But for the time being, I'm watching movies because I can't go outside.
Yeah, and I'm Kamara. I like movies. Definitely not as much as Nate, but, I make movies sometimes as a thing. It's not really, I just do it. And this week we watched...
That was great.
Yeah, I know.
Introduction.
It was great.
Really quickly, before we get into what we watched, I just want to say, one, welcome to Animation Week. This week on our podcast, we're only going to be watching animated movies. We're going to put out a podcast Monday, Wednesday, Friday. But we're going to watch one animated movie every day, Monday through Friday, and we'll be talking about them.
Yeah.
So hopefully this episode goes well, and then you listen to the rest of them.
Yeah.
And you'll be here for Animation Week.
Yeah. Be excited to hear us talk about the movies and not actually get to watch them. But yeah, it's pretty exciting.
Also, really quickly, we don't have professional sound equipment. We weren't really planning on making a podcast. But we were locked inside and we're like, well, we have to do something. So here we are. So if it sounds bad, please cut us some slack. We're still figuring it out.
Yeah, this guy's in a closet, so...
Yeah, I'm literally sitting
I'm in
a closet right now.
Yeah.
If you hear background noise, it's our family. Hopefully it adds some charm. But if it doesn't, then just keep going.
Yeah, just pretend it never happened. But moving on, this week we watched Waltz with Bashir.
No, not this week.
Not this week. Today we watched Waltz with Bashir. It's directed by Ari Folman. It was released in 2008, and it's an animated movie. It's a war movie specifically.
It's a war documentary.
Yeah, it's essentially just
mix.
A really long animated interview.
Yeah.
And it follows.
But that's not a bad thing.
It's not a bad thing. It's a great
thing.
Nate, you should talk more about the plot because I don't know nearly as much about this.
So the movie, it's called Waltz With Bashir, like Kamar said, it's from 2008. It was released at the New York Film Festival to wide acclaim. I think either it won an Oscar in 2008 for Best Foreign Picture, or it got nominated. I'm not really sure. It won. Yeah, it won. It won? Yeah. Cool. So it won. So that's cool. So Waltz With Bashir. It is about the 1988 Israeli invasion of Lebanon and the Lebanese War. Specifically, in sort of the nitty-gritty details of the movie, it's about one soldier, Ari Folman, who was a soldier in the army. He made this documentary where he interviewed his friends who were in the army to sort of see what they thought happened, to sort of get at what really happened versus what everyone thought happened. Because the movie really concerns itself quite heavily with truth versus fiction and memory versus fact, and how memory can destroy fact and how the way that we perceive things can cloud our judgment of what actually happens. And he sort of goes about this by interviewing his friends from the war and animating it sort of with these very trippy nightmare images of dogs running through the streets or people coming out of pitch black waters and children being murdered and all this stuff. So it's a pretty heavy movie. Maybe it was a weird choice for our first movie. It's not a funny movie, so our laughter has nothing to do with the movie, but it is a we can just get into it really quickly, just what I guess we can just talk about what we thought, and then we can get into more of the conversation that I want to have. Kamara, what did you think of the movie?
Yeah, so right off the bat, I noticed the visual style. It takes a page out of basically comic books. Period. It has a very gritty style. It's cell shaded. There are a lot of dark colors used for shading and filling in. And overall, it just kind of sets the tone for the movie. You know, right off the bat that it's not going to be something that you're gonna laugh about after. It's a serious movie.
Yeah.
It's a serious movie. And in simplest terms, it's really good. It's really good. I feel like it, despite the fact that it's an animated movie about war or a specific event in war, it doesn't make you entertained by the events that are shown. Battles in the film aren't glorified. There are quite a few moments where you really question whether this stuff actually happened, because it just seems like humans couldn't do that. Like, people don't do that type of stuff, but then you realize it's based on truth. So after watching it, I literally, my jaw dropped, because the movie ended so abruptly, with just like these images of death and despair. And I was left, wondering what I had gotten myself into, because I didn't expect this movie to be as heavy as it was.
Yeah. It's a pretty good movie. It's a great movie, I think. Personally, I have a few questions about it. But yeah, like, the animation style is fantastic. It really, really sort of elevates what could have been a very simple, like, talking head documentary to a totally new level, where it goes from just people talking about a war and this thing that happened like long ago, to this total like nightmare of like rabid dogs sprinting down the street, and murder and violence and pain and all this stuff. And I think it's pretty similar to like a movie like Rashomon, which I don't know if you've seen it, Kamara, but it's by Akira. It's by Akira Kurosawa. It's 1951, I'm pretty sure. It's a movie that's basically all about truth, and how the truth is changed based on who witnesses it. Because the way that Rashomon works is you have this testimonial about a woman being raped, told from 3 different perspectives, and each perspective gives 3 different stories about what the truth is. And so this movie, very similarly, is about the 1988, the 1988, I'm pretty sure. If the date's wrong, we can move past it. But the 1988 invasion of Lebanon by Israel, but it's filtered through a whole bunch of different perspectives. So the truth of the matter is a little blurry.
Yeah.
Because sort of the whole baseline for the movie is it's this guy who lost his memories of the war, so he goes out to talk to his friends to get his memories back, and he starts sort of getting flashbacks. And so the movie really concerns itself with truth and perspective, and how those intertwine and affect each other, and how they change everything. Yeah. So one of the things that I thought was super interesting about the film, and really well done, was the way that perspective was taken into. I mean, the whole movie is about perspective, but how it keeps bringing you to these recurring images, and every time you go back, you have new information, so you recontextualize the images. So, like, there's an image of soldiers coming out of coming out of the water. It's pitch black. They're naked. They have guns. It's the first image you see in the movie, I'm pretty sure, or it's one of the first. But the movie keeps returning us to that image, and every time we have new information. So we see the image going from soldiers wandering into a foreign country to people like trespassing, to maybe it didn't even happen, and it really makes you recontextualize all these things. I don't even know if that made sense.
I think it makes sense.
Did that make sense? I don't know. Maybe this is all gibberish, but we'll keep going anyways. But I thought that was really interesting. And another thing, like, I'm going to try and, I guess, stay away from spoilers, but it's a documentary, so there's not much spoiling that we can do, I guess. Well, that's definitely not true. I'm going to try and stay away from more of, like, the heavier things, but, like, one scene that I really loved not loved in the sense of like I enjoyed watching it because it's not the easiest thing to watch, but I loved like thinking about it was there's this scene where a soldier is in a tank and it's about to be blown up, so he runs away and hides, and then he ends up swimming through a sea and gets back to his soldiers.
Yeah.
And so when he was running away, he thought of himself as a survivor, but when he got back to the soldiers, they all saw him as a coward.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a really, really interesting thing of sort of how he saw it one way, they saw it another way, and how that totally changed the way that he saw that event, but then the way that he operated throughout the rest of this war. And there's a lot of that perspective shifting from, like, the Lebanese people were, or the Palestinians as they called in the movie, I think, go from, like, faceless people who you don't even see to, like, victims full of pain and suffering. And, you know, the Israeli army go from the heroic forces who had to do what they had to do to, you know, maybe like they were perpetrators of this horror as well, which I think is really interesting.
And there was a line in the movie where someone says that they take the role of the Nazis, or they take the role of, you know, like soldiers, in the fact that they're not necessarily the ones killing people, but they're allowing for it to happen. And, you know, obviously Nazis killed people, but
thank you for
you know,
for pointing that out.
Obviously, but in the fact that they're sitting idly and allowing for this to happen, despite the fact that they have the capability to put an end to it, it makes you question like responsibility in war, and simply being in a wartime doesn't mean you shouldn't take responsibility.
And that was like, oh sorry, no.
I don't know if this is really a spoiler. But I feel like if it, like, I don't know too much about Israel versus Palestine, obviously. I know
it's a big conversation. We can leave it at that.
You know, it makes you wonder, like, whether going into all of that history, whether the group of people that were being persecuted was different, whether or not, like, the response would have changed. You know, like simply getting a call and saying, yeah, you know, thanks for bringing it to my attention. You know, this massacre that's killing thousands of people. Thanks for telling me. And then hanging up and going to sleep. Versus, oh, you know, yeah, these people are being killed. Let's get on it. You know, but that doesn't happen.
Yeah. Well, that's sort of that. This is totally separate. Well, actually, it's not that separate. But James Baldwin has this quote that I really love. They said, I mean, obviously he said it in real life, but I heard it in the documentary I Am Not Your Negro. We were talking about how when the Israelis, and this was in 1960, you know, 4.
Yeah, obviously a lot's changed since
so
then.
This was a while ago. But he was talking about how when the Israelis picked up guns, the world cheered them on. But when black people in America picked up guns, you know, the world tried to kill them. Yeah, which I think is, I mean, obviously that's like a fact of history, and it's a very interesting thing, and I think that this movie deals really heavily with also who are the victims. There's a scene really early on in the movie where there's this car driving down a road and it's just totally like shot up, and all the soldiers shoot out of fear and anxiety because they don't know who's in the truck or what's going to happen. And when they walk up to it, it's just a family, you know, and it goes from like faceless enemies to these victims of something that they had nothing to do with. Yeah. Which is really interesting. And I think it's especially interesting that like usually like these themes are taken up in, you know, your like shaky cam, like Oscar bait, like drama, you know? Yeah. And I think it's especially interesting that when they went about talking about this, it was in an animated film with these really like hallucinogenic images, which really sort of turns it from like a basic like talking head thing, like I said earlier, to something closer to Apocalypse Now, for example, to like it totally like elevates it, and the music too has this sort of very like a ticking clock to it, where there's always this like undercurrent of like beat, which just makes you a little bit like on edge, and everything's always like sort of blue or sort of orange. So this feeling of on edge, of this feeling of being on edge, plus the feelings of not really knowing what's happening, all this stuff really help to create this world of confusion, which then once you get into the current part of the movie where they're going back and looking at memories, it really sort of comes full circle to create this really well done story.
And it really works in the sense that you still at the end of the movie don't know what actually happens. You know, like the director is the guy in the movie, so but he's telling his story. He's telling what he believes happened.
But it also says that he wrote the movie. Which usually with a documentary, no one writes it because you're interviewing people. So I'm curious, did he have these conversations and then write them into sort of a more narrative form? Or is this really 100% like he took a microphone and interviewed people, or what was going on?
Yeah.
Which I think just adds more to the layers of this movie.
Yeah, and like going back, the theme, or at least one of the themes that I picked up on, that we kind of talked about a bit earlier, was just the fact that memories are not reliable. Like you can fill in blank spaces with things that never happened, which is the reason why you may have a childhood memory of something that never happened, which they talk about in the movie. And like all of these recollections added in with the coloring, and how everything looks kind of like a dream, and the way that the stories are told makes it seem like an action movie, you know, being ambushed in the jungle by a bunch of kids. You know, that makes it feel unreliable in the sense that you're watching a movie or you're watching a documentary about first-hand accounts from people that were on one side, you know? Like, they're all on one side. You don't know the story of the people on the other side. You can only trust what these
was a
people are
really
saying.
I thought that was a really interesting way of going about it, where, and while I was watching the movie, I was sort of questioning how responsible it was, since it was not engaging in the slightest with the perspective of the people who were not the soldiers, but the perspective of the people who were just like living there, you know, who got murdered and shot and massacred. But then as I sort of got further and further through the movie, I realized that was sort of the point. That, you know, all these memories, they don't have space for these victims. They're so surrounded with the person in the moment. And I guess maybe that's a good segue into a question that I had, which is, do you think this movie is responsible in the way that it handles war and like massacres, you know, and all this painful stuff?
I don't know if it's necessarily responsible, but I think it's real. You know, it's realistic. Because when you hear stories about these massacres, who do you hear it from? Like, you don't hear it from the people who've been, you know, persecuted. You don't hear it from them. You always hear it from the traumatized soldier, blah, blah, blah. You know, like, I was there. I didn't actually shoot anyone, but, you know, I watched it. You always hear it from that perspective. And I think the movie does that, which makes it realistic. Because that's just how it is. Like, you know, that's the perspective that we want to tell.
Well, yeah, because I was also sort of struggling with that sort of the idea, because especially when I watch a movie that's on a subject as serious as this, I'm really like weary of how responsible the movie is in telling its story, and if it's being, you know, like, if it's like, if the movie is exploiting these really like horrible things just to get you to like cry or something, which I don't think is a responsible way to do things. And there are some scenes that I think that the first time I saw them, I was a little not a huge fan of. Like, there are these music montages where it's like soldiers on a beach, you know, surfing and all this stuff, and then there's like a montage of like tanks, you know, driving by and like blowing up this car, or when there's an airplane bombing this car and they keep missing and they're hitting all the buildings next to the car, but they keep going anyways, and this was all set to this like music montage, and I was initially like, this is kind of a irresponsible, like gross way to talk about all this pain, to show it like it's a comedic thing. But then as I got to the end of the movie and I thought about it more, this was probably this is probably how the soldiers felt about it.
Yeah.
Because like more often, like up until the end of the movie, most of the soldiers in the movie they try to separate themselves from the responsibility of their actions.
Yeah.
Not going so far to say like I was just taking orders, but they there's a scene where they're seeing people being put up against a wall and shot, like innocent people who are living in this town that they're in, and they call up their commander, nothing happens, and the conversation ends. They don't try to do anything else. And so I thought it was really interesting how you can separate yourself from this pain and violence, sort of like one of the characters in the movie was talking about how the soldier saw it as just a movie that he was walking through.
Yeah. I want to go back to this scene with the car and the beach. Essentially, like the context. A bunch of soldiers they just took a beach, and there's a car driving by, shooting some soldiers, and a bunch of soldiers are shooting RPGs at it. A plane, is trying to bomb it, but it just drives off unscathed. It's it appears to be comedic. It looks like it's funny.
It looks like a Benny Hill moment where like the car like skitters off screen.
Yeah, but the thing is, I realize that with the whole movie being about disassociating yourself from these things, it makes it easy for the soldiers or for whatever perspective it's from to view it as this funny thing. And like there's a line in the movie, or there's a part where they're talking about a soldier who, during the war, he didn't really consider it to be like a whole ordeal. He was like, oh, it's just a day trip. What beautiful landscape. And he viewed the world through a camera, but then that camera broke, and then he saw it for what it was.
And also at the same time that the camera breaks in this story, the camera of the movie breaks, and suddenly the tone shifts
to something
from
way more serious,
being a war movie, basically. Like a documentary about like what these soldiers did like during this war, to being about the very nature of war itself, and what it means to conquer and then to forget the memories and all that stuff. I was watching the movie, and there's a scene in the movie where one of Ari Folman's friends in the like current day is talking to him about his memories and how he could like disassociate, and the friend talks about how in this moment the Israeli soldiers were taking on the role of the Nazis, not necessarily in the perpetrating of the actual murders, but in the sense that they allowed it to happen, which obviously the Nazis did more than allow it to, but in that context of that scene, when he said that line, it made me think a lot about, there's this movie called Come and See, which we've both seen.
We watched that together.
Which is a really rough movie, but there's this line in that movie, Come and See really quickly, is the story of he's a 14-year-old boy in Belarusia during World War II, who runs off to join the army, full of this sort of like nationalist pride, and his entire world falls apart around him. It's a horrifying movie. But there's this scene in the movie Come and See where there are these Russian soldiers who say, like Russian soldier, or like people who are living in Belarusia who joined the Nazis, who said, like they're not Nazis, they have nothing to do with it, they were just following orders, blah blah blah. The classic I'm not a Nazi spiel. And they're trying to disassociate from that. And I thought it was really interesting how, like as well, like in a more like broader sense, like there are war movies that are about the act of just like killing someone, like something like Saving Private Ryan, and then there are more sort of metaphorical, spiritual, more heady movies that they're about like what does it mean to wage war, and then to 10 years later try and wipe it like out of your mind. And when you do that, do you wipe out the victims and the pain and the destruction that you caused? And I feel like that, like this movie is an attempt to go back and like reconcile with the fact that most of these soldiers did these horrible things and then they walked out, and
they,
maybe they had PTSD, but they could
yeah,
sort of like turn off their brains and walk away from it all.
essentially,
While these people living in
wiping out
Lebanon
their
had to,
responsibility, you know.
right. And I think
in
it's
the
really
actions.
interesting that they did this also through an animated movie. I feel like I am just saying the same thing over and over again.
It's new stuff. It's new stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have anything?
Yeah, I don't think so. I
Like
mean,
the show?
I think overall the movie is, I don't know if it even has a message per se, just because
Well,
like,
that actually, speaking on that note, I have one more question I can ask.
yeah,
Really quickly, do you think this is a pro-war movie or an anti-war movie?
I think it's very blatantly an anti-war movie.
Right.
But it doesn't act to, I don't know, I feel like in its intention it's supposed to humanize the actions, or like the horrific actions taken during war, committed during war, by bringing a face to it, like this guy forgets everything that happened, but
Right.
at the same time it may have backfired in that sense, because at the same time I don't feel like sympathetic towards the soldier, but I don't
Well, I don't know if the
necessarily.
movie was trying to make you sympathetic.
I don't know if it's supposed to make you feel sympathetic, but like I don't feel like it's not like a sense of forgiveness. Obviously I wasn't there.
Right.
I can't forgive him for that because it's not my experience. But I don't think that the movie takes a role in trying to get you to forgive or get you to do
Right.
anything like that.
But I don't think that the movie's trying to make you forgive. I think it's trying to make you look this like ugly moment in the face and see it as what it was, not as what you thought it was.
Yeah.
Like there are people who thought of it as this heroic moment where one country stood up to defend itself, and there are other people on the other side who thought of it as this horrible moment where there are these people who are just living here who did nothing to deserve this, and then it just happened to them. And I think that this movie was a way of sort of reconciling those two perspectives and making you look at this really sort of ugly moment. I mean, like, war is an ugly thing, and I haven't fought in any wars. I'm 18. What the hell do I know about war? I'm sure that there have been uglier wars, and there will be like uglier wars in the future. But this, to me, seems like a pretty ugly moment in the massacres that were happening, and it's a way of this filmmaker who took a part in it trying to force himself and people in general to look at it and see it for what it was and all the contradictions that happened during it, which I think is really interesting. That being said, I do feel like there are moments where it just goes into your basic like war movie. There's that beach montage where, even though I get what it's going for, I still feel a little bit like it's an exploit, like a little bit of it being an exploitative movie and taking this moment as like as something to like milk emotions from someone.
Yeah. No, that's why I feel the way I feel. Like,
yeah.
I feel like the movie, maybe not in its intent, but in its outcome, made me feel like obviously it made me recognize that these things do happen. Like, obviously these things happen. Mm-hmm. We knew these things happen. But it kind of forces the viewer to realize, like, this is just one part in the whole thing. This wasn't the whole war. This was one part, and yet that killed so many people. And going back to that part with the car and the planes trying to bomb
bombing of the car on the beach.
It does, why I say that, like, forgiveness and stuff, it does make you switch your view of the movie back into like that classic war movie where the guy running around killing people is the hero. So that's why I say that, because with that part it flicks a switch in your brain that transfers you back to your classic war movie. And then the other parts of the movie like switch it back, again to like the realistic, gritty events. So I definitely think that there were some parts in the movie that made the soldier seem more heroic, quote unquote, but
Right.
maybe that wasn't the intent, but that was something that the movie may have done unintentionally, that just kind of messes with your overall perspective on how to view this character and how to view
Right.
the actions, yeah.
Yeah. What if you had to give it a rating out of 5 stars? What would you give it?
I think I give it a 4.5.
Okay, I gave the movie a 3.5.
Why?
Well, just because I wasn't for me when I watch a movie, how I'm feeling and how I am emotionally connecting with the movie is a big thing, and there are parts of the movie where I just got kind of bored, kind of taken out of the moment. Still, 100% you should go watch this movie and make up your own mind about it, because I'm one point of view and Kamara's one other point of view, and I think there's a lot to talk about in this movie, and we've barely scratched the surface. So I 100% recommend, if anyone is listening, and if you are, thank you very much. And if you aren't, well, this is a little awkward. But I really do highly recommend it, if only to get a new perspective and a new way of thinking about stuff. So yeah, Kamar, do you have anything else that you'd like to talk about?
It's
anything else
a good
that we
movie.
want to talk about?
No, that's it.
Yeah.
That's
No,
a good movie.
but
Go
I
watch
mean,
it.
like as a more general.
Oh yeah.
Just like in life,
Oh yeah.
How's your quarantine going?
Animal Crossing.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
that's it. I'm not kidding.
That's fair enough.
That's what I've been doing every day. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And that tonal shift, much like Waltz with Bashir. So you could call us filmmakers on our own regard. Yeah. Okay. But thank you so much. I'm Nate. He's Kamara.
Was I supposed to say my name?
Yeah, I don't know.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Sign off. I don't know.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.